All right, Bookkeeping Side Hustle community, I'm so glad you tuned in to learn about creating and repurposing your content. Here's the situation. We got Jeremy Wells here, who's active in our community and in the larger accounting, like social media world. He owns an accounting firm called J. Wells CFO. He recently obtained a CPA license, I know. And I noticed that he was creating a lot of content for small businesses. And then I saw a tweet somewhere where someone had like recognized that he'd been like a content machine. And so I was, got up in his DMs and said, "Hey, would you come teach us the rest of us how you're cranking out so much content?" So that's what this video is going to be about. We're going to try to keep it as short, as sweet, and as possible. So I'm going to try not to ramble, but these are the questions I'm going to ask him: the steps to create content, how many pieces of content he expects to get out of one idea, the tools he uses. I want him to tell us what other methods and tech he has used that maybe haven't worked so well. I also am interested in the results that, Jeremy, that you're seeing from your efforts and which platforms you're seeing the most traction on. And then I hope folks stick around to the very end, because the very last question I'm going to ask is his best advice for someone who wants to start creating content, but can't see themselves doing all that he's going to describe to us. I want to ask him for like the number one tip to get started, so it doesn't seem overwhelming. So that's what we're going to talk about. And Jeremy, if you is there anything I didn't say in the introduction that you want to chime in with? But otherwise, we're going to kind of turn it over to you to get to these questions.
No, let's go for it. First of all, thank you so much for having me, Kate. Really appreciate the opportunity to talk to your audience.
Yeah, I'm so glad for you being a good sport and willing to help the broader community. I mean, there's always, I think, a abundance mindset like this is always great. So, well, let's get started. So I was noticing all this content that you're putting out for small businesses. Talk about the steps that you go through to create your content.
Yeah, so it started back a few years ago. I read a book. I am not a I'm not an entrepreneur. I am not a salesperson or marketer. I have no training or work experience in any of those other than what I've had to do for my own firm, which I've only been running for about 4.5 years at this point. So everything that I'm saying is that I only have the one professional experience that I've done it in, which is for my own firm. I have no formal training in any of it, and it's all an experiment. And I think that's one of the keys, right? Is that you have to look at all of this as an experiment. You have to be willing to try things. That running a business is a laboratory, right? And in terms of your sales, your marketing, your fulfillment, all of those things are just trial and error. And the things that seem to work, iterate on those and improve them. The things that don't work, leave them behind. Don't get emotional about it. Move on, right? And so that's the first thing, right? So as far as the actual content production, so this started a few years ago when I knew I needed to get serious about marketing, having a game plan, having a strategy. And before I became an accountant, I was an academic. I researched and taught political science at university. So I always start with literature, right? Like, what's written on this? What have people already thought of? What have people already come up with? And what have they written down so that we can go and read that? And so I started reading, scouring business books, books on marketing, books on sales. One that I came across that really resonated with me was a book called They Ask, You Answer by Sheridan. And it's a really cool story. To kind of sum it up, the guy becomes a partner in a pool installation business in 2007. So if you know what's going on in the world in 2007 and about to happen in 2008, it's a horrible time to be in any industry that is related to real estate, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. And so 2008, 2009 rolls around and no one is interested in installing pools. And so he's got to figure out a way to solve this business. Well, he realizes that one thing that is pretty prevalent in the pool installation industry is that nobody really knows anything about it, right? And so customers really don't have any frame of reference when it comes to, who they should pick, who they should go with, what they're actually going to do, what differentiates all these different pool installation companies out there. I think accountants are kind of similar, right? Beyond the CPA around the corner, What differentiates one accountant from another? What differentiates one bookkeeper from another? What differentiates one tax preparer from another, right? The only thing that's going to differentiate us is what we're doing to try to connect with our audiences, with our prospective customers. And so the premise of his book and the strategy that he employed was to just produce lots of content. And so he would stay up late, he would get up early, and he would start writing blog posts. And yeah, there's some SEO work that goes into that. There is, building up the audience, this kind of thing. But he came at it from the perspective of not just putting out a lot of content talking about what he does, but actually answering questions that he knew his prospective customers had, right?
Okay.
Because what are people doing when they're going and searching online? They're trying to find answers, right? They're trying to find answers to the questions they have, right? If I'm going to install a pool, who's the best pool installer? What brand pool should I use? What material pool should I use for those pools, right? How big should the pool be? All these different kinds of questions. He knew people were out there asking them. What's going to be the differentiator? It's going to be the pool installation companies that are actually out there answering those questions online, so that people, when they're searching, they stumble upon those answers, and those answers happen to be sitting in blog posts that are on that company's website, right?
Okay.
So that's the idea, and that's the gist of it, and that's what I started doing. I started thinking about, what are the questions that I'm constantly hearing? What are the questions that prospective clients are bringing to me? What questions are clients bringing to me? And then, there's a gold mine of content ideas out there already. When we look at websites like Reddit, Quora, LinkedIn, all these websites that already have people out there talking about, here are the struggles I go through as a business owner. Here are the reasons I don't get along with my CPA. Here are the reasons that I'm looking for yet another bookkeeper to work for me, right? All of these questions, all of these concerns are already out there. It's just a matter of us finding them and then providing answers for them. And so that's where the ideas for the content that I'm going to write come from.
Okay. So you start with writing.
Yeah. So...
But you have a show. You have the J. Wells show or something.
Yeah. So it starts with writing. So my first place was with writing, and whether that writing is going to turn into something written that's short form, like a tweet, or long form, like a blog post or an email newsletter, or becomes the outline of a video, it's just going to depend on the topic. It's going to depend on the way I'm thinking about it. So think about in the course of your own business, right? You get a question from a client. Say that client, sends you an email with a question, and you're sitting there reading that, and your initial reaction is, well, it came to me as an email, so I'll just write an email back. And then you get 3 or 4 paragraphs into that email, and you're just like, wow, this is a lot, right? I don't know if I can really do this in an email. I don't know if an email is the most effective way to do this. So then you think, okay, well, what if we got on a call? Right? So I'm going to tell the client, hey, schedule a call with me, or, you pick up the phone and you call them, depending on how that relationship works. And then you have this conversation. Well, now you're in a different medium, right? And so depending on how you're actually conducting that call, for example, if you're doing it on a video call, you can record that call. Now you can save that for later. If you're doing it on the phone, this is one reason I don't like using phones to communicate with clients. It's quicker, it's easier, it's fine for one-offs, but there's no recording of it. There's no way to go back and reference that, right? And so video and audio bring in a whole new dimension to it, right? So if it's something that is going to be a quick one-off or kind of a personal thing, then maybe just shooting back an email works. But maybe if it's something that's going to be, more evergreen, right? Something that you're going to want to reference that client back to, maybe recording that as a Loom video, right? Or as even an audio message will work sometimes, right? So these kinds of things, these kinds of decisions of which medium do I actually need to present this answer, this response to, it's the same thing when it comes to content. Is this something where it would be better for me to have a little bit of animation? Something better for me to actually be able to look the camera in the eye, right? And really give the listener or the viewer the sense that I'm there just having a one-on-one conversation with them. And I think that's another critical aspect to all of this, regardless of the medium. This is something that it takes a while to get used to, but it's one of those counterintuitive things. It should be very natural, but it takes a while to get used to. Is that regardless of what medium you're using, when you're producing content in this business sense, whether that's an email newsletter or a blog post or a video or even a podcast, you're talking to one person, right? You want lots of people to hear it or to read it, but you're really just talking to one person. You're answering that one question. Again, back to Margaret Sheridan's They Ask You Answer, right? You're dealing with that one email that comes in or that one text message that comes in that's asking a question, but you're producing a response that then is available to hundreds, thousands, millions, right?
Okay. So I've been seeing on your Twitter what I think are written newsletters, maybe. Is that
Yeah,
right?
that's right.
Okay. So, and I think you have them numbered, maybe. And does that then, so like, are you writing that on WordPress
Yeah,
or so for the written content,
yeah,
because I know that's where you said that you naturally start is the written side of
yeah,
things.
yeah.
Where does that live?
Right. And so again, back to the earlier point. It's all an experiment, right?
Yep.
And you mentioned that I've got some videos. I've got about 200 videos on my YouTube channel right now. They're all short, right? We're not talking like big edited, half hour,
Like how
45
short?
minute
Two
videos.
minutes? 10 minutes?
About 2 minutes, right?
Okay.
And so I used a service to create that, right? And this is another point, outsource what you can or what you need to or what you don't feel comfortable doing. I don't want to spend hours and hours inside a video editor, right? But I do want to be
Okay.
able to produce video content. I want to be able to send clients or prospects video, right? Where I'm actually talking to them.
Yep.
And so I used a service that I could record about 60 minutes of me talking on a particular topic. I sent it to them. They're not accountants. They have no idea what I'm talking about, but they know what people are looking for. They know what people are searching for. And so they can pick up, in the span of that 60 minutes, they can pull out six, 1 to 2 minute clips out of that, 6 or 7 of those, and then make them edited, captioned, all that look good for public consumption, right? So whether that's on Twitter or YouTube or wherever. So I started with that. I would outline those. Now the outlines are great for pulling points out to make blog posts or newsletters about, right? And then I would also get the transcriptions back. Again, the transcripts are great for just copying and pasting those into the rough draft of a blog post or something like that. Well, now, right, I used that service for almost a year. Went great. Had a good relationship with them. Decided I had enough built up through that. Went back to writing, and so now what I'm doing is going back through that catalog as well as new questions, right? New issues that have come up since then, and I'm going back through and I'm thinking about how to write this out. The end goal here is eventually at least one book that I want to be able to put together, and I've got the rough draft of about half of that put together. And so again, it's just an experiment, right? It's taking these different ideas, these different questions, and thinking about what's a way that I can put this together into a response that's going to make sense for the intended audience. So to answer your question, what am I using to actually do this? Well, the actual piece of email software that I'm using is called Review. It's getreview.com, I think.
Okay.
But it was bought a while back by Twitter, and so now it's actually kind of built into the Twitter UI. So if you go to someone's Twitter profile and you see a box under their profile where it says you can subscribe to their newsletter, that's what it is. It's Get Review. It's a pretty simple, relatively easy to spin up and get started with it.
Okay.
It delivers a pretty simple looking email to your audience, and there's a lot of other options out there, and I played around with some of them. ConvertKit is a great option if you want to do some more advanced kind of newsletter management or email marketing management. But yeah, that's the option I went with. And again, it's an experiment. I might switch to a different software. I might try different things. For right now, that's just what I'm settled on.
So after you use the newsletter on Get Review, does that become anything else?
Yeah, that's a good question. So where those actually start, where the rough drafts for those actually start is in an app called Drafts, which I use Apple products. I use Mac products, right? So I think Drafts is only on Mac. But you could use any sort of. I recommend starting off with a plain text editor. I don't like drafting in a word processor. I wouldn't use Word or even Docs for this, Google Docs, because it's so easy to get into that editorial mindset.
Editing.
And so you
Yeah.
start thinking about, right, how is this going to look in the finished product, right? How is the formatting going to look? How is
Huh.
all of this? So I like using a plain text editor. I'll do a little bit of markdown, but I like just being able to get those words out onto the page, and then in a secondary process, come back and say, okay, how do I actually want this to look in the finished product? But at first, I'm just trying to get words out on the page. In fact, when I was using that video service, the transcriptions that I would get back were in .txt files. They were in plain text files. So there was no editing in them, because they've got to be ready to be able to post to any, social media website. And all of those are going to have plain text editors, right? So, it just start off in that mindset of this is just getting words on a page, the same way you would drafting an email to a client, right? When you start writing that email back to a client, you're not thinking about, what needs to be italicized, what needs to be bold, what needs to be your H1 header, right? You're not thinking about all these things that are after the fact, right? You're just thinking about, how do I answer this question? How do I provide value to this client? How do I be helpful and get them to the point to where they feel comfortable making this decision so that we can all move on with our lives, right? And it's the same thing when you're producing content in your marketing, right? Just try to be helpful. Just get the words on the page, or if you're recording a video, right? Just get that outline put together. Bullet points is probably the most formatting you'll ever need for an outline, right? Just get that outline done, and then just start talking into the camera. Don't worry about editing it. Don't worry about, making mistakes. Don't worry about misspeaking or all that. You can always edit that stuff out. Same way in written, language. You can always edit that stuff out or change the editing. Just get it out there, make the rough draft, and then figure out what to do with that after.
I want to stay on your process, but I have a pitch for the not the plain text editor. I've been using Google Docs because in the tools you can turn on voice typing. So the top header bar, y'all, you can turn on tools and voice typing,
Yep.
and that's how I've been starting, which is skirting around the typing, and I'll blab blah 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 blab, and then I'll be like, okay, now I have to go, but I don't do the bolding, I'm treating it like a plain text editor, but that has helped
Right.
me have more of a I guess spoken feel than a written feel. So it kind of depends on what you're going for, y'all. Okay, so drafts to then get review, which is prettier. And then after get review, so eventually you're going to hit publish. I guess, get review has draft, you'll hit publish.
Yep.
How does that end up going to the J Wells show, or does it?
Okay, so let me take a step back, because I'm also, for the last few weeks, I've also been putting out the weekly podcast. So this actually started before I started doing the video. I started doing a podcast that was a video podcast. It came out once a week, and this was more of an interview style show. So I actually had an editor for that, a different service that was editing that. So I would set up the calls. We would use Zoom. We would record it. I would send the recording to this editor, and then he would edit it down. He would add a little bit of formatting to it, and he would have it published to YouTube for me, as well as using Anchor.fm. So Anchor.fm is a podcast publishing service. I think it's now owned by Spotify. In fact, so if you because after Apple Podcasts, Spotify is the number 2 podcasting platform, right? And so, but Anchor will post to all of these different podcast outlets, right? I restarted that last couple of weeks. So probably about 2 months ago, I started writing daily newsletter, and then about a month ago, I started recording the weekly podcast again, where it's just me talking. Now, the great thing about that is there's interplay, because what I talk about on the podcast, so I'll record that on Friday, and then it'll publish on Monday. So then the next week, I'm writing my email newsletter, breaking down things that I talked about in the podcast, right? So the Monday newsletter comes out. It's just announcing that there's a new episode. And then Tuesday through Sunday is going more in depth on some of the things that I talked about. And then some of that is getting questions back from the people that are either listening to the podcast or reading the newsletter, or things that I'm thinking about, right? Maybe this is something I should have clarified. Maybe this is something that I should have, gone a little deeper on. And then that becomes ideas for the next episode or the next newsletter, right? So you start to get this sort of iterative process
Yeah.
where between the ideas that and the responses that you're getting back, and then listening back or thinking back to what you said, what you've already written, right? And so these ideas don't just come from nowhere, right? You know, they actually come from the work. So the best thing you can do is, if you're struggling to come up with ideas for content, is to just start with one place, right? Just start with one idea. And, you know, here's the other thing is, you know, if you're a knowledge worker, right? And, you know, accountants, bookkeepers, we're all knowledge workers. We're using our brains to actually, you know, not our hands, to actually produce, you know, the work that we're doing for our clients and customers. If you are a knowledge worker, you're already producing content in all the emails that you're writing back to the clients, in the reports that you're producing for them, right? In the conversations that you're having with your clients, with your colleagues, right? You're already producing all of this content. The question isn't, are you producing content? The question is, what's the audience for that content? Because most of the time, the audience for that content is one other person, right? It's the client. Can you take that email that you just wrote to a client answering their question? Can you anonymize that response? Can you generalize it a little bit and now put it on your website as a blog post? Can you put it, you know, into an email newsletter and blast it out to your entire client base, right? Can you post that as a thread on Twitter? Can you make that a post on LinkedIn? Of course you can, right? So you've already got the content, you've already got the ideas. Now you just need to do that. Then you need to see what kind of response you're getting. You may not get a response, but you might put that out there and then immediately think, wow, wait, what about this other thing though? You know, start thinking about when this generalized version of what you put out there wouldn't be true, right? And now you've got another post, right? You know, I know yesterday I told you to do it this way, but if your situation is a little bit different, here's the way you need to do it instead. Now you've got a second post, right? And you just keep iterating on these ideas. But it starts with one, right? You've got to start with one place. You got to get over the hump and put that first post out there. And from there, it's actually more of a downhill process.
So on Fridays, when you're doing back to the show, are those longer form so you can dissect them the following week?
Yeah. And so that's the way I'm thinking about my outline for the podcast. I'm thinking about what is something where, you know, I could easily break this down into 3, 4, 5 different topics, you know, subtopics, right? And so now I can go into that more in depth in the newsletter, right? So, you know, for example, my last one was on out of another book that I read called The 30-Minute CFO. He talks about the 4 phases that every business goes through. Right. It starts off in the wonder phase. That's sort of the startup phase. It goes into the blunder phase, or the growing pains phase. And it goes into the thunder phase, right? Where things really start picking up. And then it goes into the plunder phase, right? Where things start to decline because now this is a mature business. The market share is starting to decline. Competition is starting to creep up. So now the owners have to make a big decision, right? Do we keep this thing going or do we sell off, right? And so, you know, I'm reading this and I'm thinking about, okay, where do my clients fit into these 4 different phases? Is this a useful model? Is this something that I can apply to the way I'm advising my own clients? Because I have clients in all 4 of those phases, right? And so based on this framework, this model, this way of thinking about, you know, where a business could be, is this something that I can roll into my own advisory? And if so, this is something I need to be producing content on. Because here's the other thing, is that you're not producing content only to help your audience, you're also producing it to also help your own way of thinking about things. So when I'm reading stuff or when I'm writing up content to publish, I'm not just thinking about, you know, is this something that I can immediately turn around and help a client with? This is something that I'm thinking about, does this cause me to think differently, right, about the way I'm running my own business, the way I'm advising all my clients, right? So, you know, I'm reading about this 4-step model, and now I'm starting to think about, okay, what matters is not so much where your business is, but where you want your business to be. And so how you get from one phase to the next, right? Well, that's 3 different transitions. So now I've got 3 different conversations, right? I've got 3 different email newsletters that I can send, 3 different blog posts, right? About how do you make the transition from one phase to the next, because that's what clients are going to start asking about, right? They might feel like they're in the startup phase, but they want to know when they get to the phase to where profits start coming in, right? Well, how can I as an advisor help them make that transition? Because that book that I read didn't get into that. It was just identifying those 4 different phases, right? But now the question is, well, how do we get from one to the next? So again, you know, part of creation of content relies on consumption of content, right?
Yeah.
So you got to be out there reading stuff. You can't only consume, you've got to create too. But as you're reading, think critically, right? Like think in a perspective of how does this help my clients, right? Not just, how does this help me, or is this interesting to read about, but how does this help my clients? Can I reconstruct this, right? Can I reshape this in a way that now I can use this as a basis for advising my clients? And then start explaining that, right? Putting that in, put that into words, put that into a podcast, put that into a video for YouTube.
So I have a couple technical questions. You used the phrase video podcast earlier. Does that just mean talking head YouTube video that then also can be put on an audio platform? Is that what that means? There's nothing, okay, nothing more to it than that. I didn't know if it was like a separate, so I've always tried to say, like, don't think of yourself as a YouTuber if that's a hard to get around. Like I put things out on YouTube, but I'm not a YouTuber. I'm not dancing and cutting my screens all cool. Like it's just a platform for messaging, and if people want the visual, they can. If they don't, you can listen to it on Spotify. I've never put anything on a podcast though. I'm creating tutorials lately, and so those might not be as suited for audio, y'all. But you can think about, like, could I do every third video as a more of a talking head, so then I could pump stuff to a podcast platform just to make myself have more places for people to find me, but not creating that much more work. So that's a good thing to think about. A couple of other questions. Could you tell us the service that you use? You said you had stopped using them, but where you would talk for 60 minutes and then you would get back a bunch of videos?
Yeah, it's and there are lots of, I think over the last couple of years, especially with since COVID and so many people working from home and starting their own businesses, there are a few of these services now, but the one that I used and the one that I still recommend to people is called Daily Content Machine, and dailycontentmachine.co. But it's a fantastic service. I know the owner, and they take your so just like I'm doing right now, you're talking into a camera. Now they'll do this for interview style. They'll do this for you're just talking one-on-one to the camera, right? There's nobody else involved. But you take that content, that 60 minute of just raw footage. So, I would just have a set time every week where, earlier in the week I'd spend, 30 minutes coming up with an outline, and then I would sit down in front of the camera and, for the next hour I knew, I'd lock the door behind me and I would turn on the camera. I didn't need AirPods because I wasn't listening to anybody, right? I was just talking. And so, and that's the other thing, right? Like if you're doing video, the eye is the camera lens, so you have to look at the camera lens like I'm doing right now.
It's hard, but yes.
Of course, you got to look at the outline, and so they're doing this, right? But at the same time, it was me talking about things that I chose, so I'm comfortable talking about them. I know them off the top of my head, and so I wasn't reading from a script. I had an outline that I would go back to just to make sure I was, covering all the things I wanted to talk about. But it's just me having a conversation like you and I are right now. Yeah. Only, there's not actually somebody on the other side. It's just the lens of the camera. And so it was actually, after doing one or two of them, it became second nature. It was very comfortable because you get yourself in the mindset of this is just me talking to someone trying to help them. The same way if you get on a call with a client, all you're interested in doing is helping the client figure out how to get past this decision, right? And get on with their life. And that's all you're doing when you're creating content, right? It's just a fancy way of saying you're trying to be helpful to people. And so, I definitely recommend that service. If you don't have the cash to pay a service, you can still do the same thing, right? There are tons of podcasts and channels on YouTube and this sort of thing where it's the same style of content. It's the same way of just talking to the camera. Now, you might need to budget a few extra minutes or hours to go back into something like iMovie or whatever you've got on your system to where maybe you're shortening that down to a clip and it looks a little rougher. But again, it's something that you can post onto YouTube. Now, here's where the real value comes in because, you're going to put it on YouTube, and if you're just getting started, one or two people might see it,
No
right?
one's gonna watch
Nobody's
it.
going to actually watch it and see it. But you're not looking for views. Here's what you're looking for. What you're looking for is, because you're recording this, because you know people are asking you this question and you're getting tired of writing email after email explaining the same thing over and over again, the next time somebody sends you that email, instead of drafting out another email, all you need to do is say, thanks for asking, click here, right? And when they click to it, they're going to that YouTube video. And guess what? Now, instead of getting another 3 or 4 page email, 3 or 4 paragraph email that nobody wants to read, they're watching you on YouTube. Right?
And they like your face. They're like,
and
oh, he's real.
It doesn't need to be, this doesn't need to be cable television quality editing, right? All this needs to be is that you are sitting there in your office, or wherever you normally do work, like you're on a video call, looking into the lens of the camera and just having a conversation with that person. Even though you've recorded that for millions of people that could potentially be watching that, right? You're just having this one-on-one conversation with this person, but guess what? You recorded that months ago, right? And now this is the 20th or the 50th client that you've sent that same exact video to. And that right there is where you start to get the real value from it.
All right. Can you give us the ballpark of the cost of Daily Content Machine?
Yeah. Let's give 3 options, right? Because I like 3 option pricing. I like 3-tier pricing, right?
Okay.
So Daily Content Machine is definitely going to be on your premium tier of that. I think right now they might be now, again, this is to get 7 weekly clips, highly edited, for all of the major social media networks: Twitter, Facebook, YouTube, right? I think they're up to about $3,000 a month now. And so you're sending them an hour-long video every week. They're sending you back those 7 clips every week. So every week you've got that ready to schedule. They've got a few add-on services as well, where they'll actually handle the scheduling of the posting for you, so you don't even have to do that, right?
Wow.
If you do have a one-on-one podcast with somebody, or even an interview style podcast, not only will they give you the social media clips, but they'll also give you the edited podcast so that you can post that to YouTube or to your podcast networks or whatever. Those are add-ons, but the base package there is $3,000 a month, right?
Okay.
And when I signed up with them which now over 2 years ago, I think they were just getting started, so it was a little bit cheaper than that. I think they've gone up since then, like everything has, right?
Yep.
So that's the premium tier. The DIY version is, like I said, you just use the stock video editing software that comes on your computer, and you budget an extra hour or 2 to edit it yourself. Somewhere in the middle there are a slew of services now that will be somewhere between a few $100 to $1,000 a month. They're going to have a slower turnaround time. They're not going to give you all the clips edited for all the social media networks. They might just give you for YouTube, that kind of thing. But there's a lot of options now, right? Because marketing is social media video right now. That's what everybody wants, in terms of doing their marketing. People are looking up they're looking up their questions online, and they're clicking on, whenever you do a Google search, right, you get the sponsored links, the paid for links, right? And you scroll through 2 or 3 or 4 of those, right? And then what do you get? You get YouTube videos, right, that you can cycle through, and then you get the links to actual websites. So you want to be that in between. You don't want to be the sponsored links that people are scrolling past, right? You also don't want to be the links that are buried at the bottom. You want to come up as those videos on YouTube that are coming up right in between. That's the sweet spot. And so if you're putting that content onto YouTube, whether that's you doing it yourself or you're using a service to do it for you, make it look a little more polished, that's where you want to be. That's where you want to be coming up in the search engine.
All right. Have you used any paid service for written production?
No, I haven't done that. So I'm comfortable with writing.
That's your comparative advantage, it sounds like. So that would be the last thing. But other people are probably that would be like the hardest thing for them. So I guess there's probably ways to outsource that.
And here is what I would pay for, right? In my place. And if you if you want to do it the opposite way that I have, like you mentioned the speech to text, right? Like that's
Yep.
one way you can get started. It's a free way to get started. Google Docs has that, like you said. Also, Drafts app. One of the reasons I like Drafts app is because it has that as well. And in fact, it's unlimited. Somehow, Drafts app has hacked Siri to where it's using Siri, but Siri will cut you off after 15 seconds. Drafts will keep going. So as long as you keep talking, Drafts will keep recording you.
Okay.
And then it will put all of that into that plain text. But if you wanted to go the opposite direction, if you wanted to just talk into the camera and record that and then send that off to somebody and have that person transcribe it, or there's software that'll do that for you. I use a program called Descript.
Okay.
And Descript is great for coming up with a transcription of that. And then you also get the audio and the video recording. What's really cool about Descript is you can go back through the text, you can edit the text, and as you're editing the text, it will edit the video as well. So if you find a sentence that doesn't make sense, or it will automatically search for all of the ahs and ums and ohs and all of that, you can click a button, it will pull all of that out, and then it will edit the video. It'll edit them out of the video as well. So you still get that perfect sync between the transcription and the video. It's really cool software.
That's really nice.
It. Yeah.
It sometimes takes me, but just because of, struggles with like feeling great about what I'm saying, I sometimes have to say my closing of my YouTube video like 5 times. And then when I'm editing, I'm like, did I like the first one? Did I like the second one? And it's horrible. So Descript would be great for the repeat sentences too, because
Absolutely.
I know I can get flustered where I knew I had a sentence, like I had my notes and I still bungled it. And so, it makes the editing hard whenever you have the same sentence like 3 or 4 times. Like you have to get rid of that if you're going to publish it. So anyway, don't be discouraged, y'all. I say like, I'm Kate Josephine Johnson, like 5 times at the end. It's terrible. So I want to keep going through these questions. Can you tell us some of the things that haven't worked? Just maybe say like these 3 or 4 things were like my experiments that went wrong, and maybe we can avoid some of those.
Yeah, that's a great one. So I've got 2 for you.
Okay.
One would be the interview style podcast. So that it was just a lot of work. I even got my wife helping me with that. My wife set up a LinkedIn account. She started reaching out to people, and she sort of, I outsourced a lot of that, just booking guests to her. And it was fun. It was good to meet some people. I even got a couple of clients out of that. People that would come onto the show, and then as a result of that, we'd have a follow-up conversation. They became clients. So if you're okay with that, if that's something that you're interested in doing, then it might be a little bit of a lead gen opportunity for you. Now, you can't go into it trying to convert every single guest to a client, right? You'll get really frustrated with that. But it was a lot of work. And so after I think about 35 episodes of that, I just got tired. I got tired of constantly trying to find, new guests. And then you run into the problem of, you're out of episodes in the can, and your next guest cancels or reschedules on you. And now all of a sudden, your plans for the next episode, you don't have one, right? Because and so what do? You scramble, you move things around. Now you've got to record
solo
a new
episode.
Yeah, right, exactly. And so it's fine, it's great. Do it if that's your jam. For me, I did it. I did it for almost a year. And then I just got tired of trying to schedule so many appointments to do that. But
are those is that content still out there though? Is it still on your channels, or did you take it down? Yeah, it's still.
It's on. It's on
no
channel.
harm, really.
Exactly. Right. Another thing that I failed to recognize until much later was I never asked the guests to do their share of marketing for me. I felt like it was all on me, since it was my show, to put that out there. When really the idea was to be bringing people on with different and or bigger audiences than my own, right? So that they would be sharing it with their audiences. And for some reason, it just never occurred to me. Again, I'm not a marketer, right? This stuff isn't natural to me. And, so looking back, I probably should have done a better job of getting them to help with some of the marketing. But again, it was a great opportunity. It was a lot of fun. I had a lot of good conversations, and all those conversations are recorded and they're out, they're posted, and so you can go back and watch those. So I wouldn't necessarily say it failed. It was just more of, something that I tried. I realized that I didn't want to, I'm not Joe Rogan, right? Like, I don't want to make a career out of interview style podcasting, right?
Okay.
And so that's fine.
Second one.
Yeah, the second one was okay, and this was partly the tool that I was using. So the tool that you use matters, right?
Okay.
Not you've got to try different tools. Like I said, with the email newsletter, I've tried Review, I've tried ConvertKit, I've tried a couple other things. My website, when I first started with it, I built it on Squarespace. Squarespace is fine as a WYSIWYG website builder. It's good. The actual content management system of Squarespace, I just struggled with, right? I found it very difficult to actually make and post a blog post on that, right? Unlike WordPress, unlike Webflow, unlike ConvertKit, something that's just built to, you put in the text, you click a button, and now it's posted. Squarespace, I felt like I had to jump through a lot more hoops than that. So eventually, after a couple years of that, I would, through fits and starts, I would try to start posting more to the blog. I would get frustrated and I would stop. And the whole time I'm just realizing, I really should be doing a better job getting content posted on my website, but I'm just not. And so finally, I just got off of Squarespace. I transitioned first to WordPress. WordPress had changed a lot in the 15 years since the last time I had a website on WordPress, and it didn't make sense to me. So then I found out that all the cool kids are using Webflow now to build their website. So I moved over to Webflow. And then I realized that Webflow has its own set of issues. So now I'm finally using an actual web designer who's building me a website on Webflow, and we're going to work together and make sure that we build out the CMS in a way that I can actually use it. And so again, this is where I have the resources and I have the ability to say, this is something I need to outsource, right? This is something that I need help with. If you're back in that phase where you are not there yet, where you don't have the resources to outsource it, where you've got to figure it out yourself, then figure out the system that works for you. So I started off with Squarespace. It was fine as a website builder. I didn't get along with it as far as a content management system. So I had to find something else. So you're going to go through that. You're going to pick tools, and you're going to try the tools, and you're going to figure out what works and what doesn't work about the tool. It doesn't mean that there's anything wrong with you or the content you're producing or anything like that. It just means you haven't found the right tool yet. And so just keep experimenting, keep trying new tools. If you're trying different email newsletter services, you can always export your list as a CSV and import that into the next tool you want to try. So if you start with Review and you don't like it, import into ConvertKit. If you don't like ConvertKit, import into something different, right? And just keep trying until you find something that seems to work a little bit better.
I'm always thinking about ways to so I'm thinking about if you are at the point where you needed Squarespace, let's say, just to get practice, your blog post could be your title, your, an H1, an intro, and then just the video, and call that your blog post, y'all. It's not going to win with SEO, but it's going to be that basic kind of more. It's like the slice and dice. It's like you did the video. How can you get more? And maybe that's all that you can do right now until you can go through the different iterations. And now, Jeremy's gone from Squarespace to WordPress to Webflow to Web Designer. And you so don't think that you have to be as heroic all the time from the very beginning. So I'm going to move us on. Where are you seeing the most traction from these efforts? We want to make money, so not wrestle with software. Where's the juice? Is it the newsletter, the YouTube? Is it the podcast?
Yeah. This is a good question, and this is where I'm going to embarrass myself a little bit and say I don't really know, because I'm not tracking the data on this like I probably should be. I'm not going back and reviewing the data. A lot of these things, you can easily look at the data. I could pull up the data on my Twitter. I could, pull up the data on my Facebook page. I could pull up the data on my YouTube channel, all these different things. I don't do that, maybe as much as I should, or maybe it's fine that I'm not. I don't really know. What I do know is that when people come to me with questions, if I don't already have the content produced, right, if I don't already have that 2-minute video, or I don't already have that newsletter that is now that has its own unique URL sitting there, because that's what Review does, is it'll have an online version of that, so now I can share the link to that, right? So I think in terms of being prepared to answer questions that are coming in from prospects and clients, I feel like I'm doing a good job of covering things. In terms of where I'm actually getting the most traction, where I'm actually building up the audience, I don't really have much of one. This is some imposter syndrome setting in here probably. A little over 3,000 Twitter followers, I think, right now, and about 260 something newsletter subscribers. Very small numbers, right? But the point is you start building that audience based off of the people that are in your circle, and you start engaging with people who are outside of it that maybe give you an opportunity to grow. So when it was Twitter, I was trying to find other tax professionals, other CPAs, and I was engaging with their content as a way to learn, right? And figure out what I wanted to focus on. What are they focusing on that, or better yet, what are they not focusing on, right, that I could be focusing on? And so Twitter was really helpful for that. If you are into bookkeeping and tax and these kinds of questions, I find the hashtag tax Twitter community on Twitter, and they're starting to be a little bit of a CAS Twitter. So there's a whole other conversation about this acronym CAS, Client Accounting Services, Client Advisory Services, whatever you want to say it means. But there's a little bit of that. And so those of you that are more on the bookkeeping and payroll and AR, AP kind of side of things, right? CAS is what the AICPA is now calling that range of activity. And so, tax Twitter, CAS Twitter, those are good ways to jump into the conversations that are already going on. Now, you're not going to find clients that way because you're talking to people doing the same thing, right? But what you're going to find is the opportunities. You're going to find the things that the existing networks are still talking about, right? That they're trying to figure out, that they have questions about. So, for example, in tax Twitter, we still have a million questions about things that have been tax law for years now. We still have questions about qualified business income. We still have, tax questions about things coming out of the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act 2017. We still have questions about, EIP and ERC and these kinds of things. These are places where, unlicensed accounting professionals, right? Whether you're a bookkeeper or a taxpayer or whatever, you don't need to be an EA. You don't need to be a CPA. What you need to be is interested in these questions and trying to be helpful, right? And so you can find these places that are still questions that are still being debated, and you can try to figure out your own spin on them. You can go do the research on your own, try to become educated on these things, try to pick up into, where the conversation is being left off, what gaps still exist in our understanding of these topics. Because if we're still trying to figure them out, if we're still asking questions, then guess who else is also still asking questions?
No way.
All those prospective clients out there.
Yeah.
Right? All those prospective clients out there. And so what we really need in this profession more than anything right now, given all the confusion, right, and all the changes that we've seen over the last couple of years, and this gets back to our original topic, what we really need is more content that is backed by actual research, that is backed by what's actually in the law, in the regulations, in our professional understanding of these things. Not just, more influencers on TikTok talking about here's crazy tax saving strategies or, more spam, right? Because that's essentially what it is. It's spam. We need relatively less of that, and we need relatively more good content that's actually providing good, helpful answers to not just clients, but other professionals, right, in our field about how to handle these situations.
All right. I would like for you to answer the last question. Best advice. If someone's listening to this and they kind of want to curl up and die because you've been doing it for a long time and you have all your credentials and you're a natural writer and all this stuff, but we need to help them. They need to move. So what is your best advice for that first step to get started with making content?
Yeah. Uh, the number one piece of advice is never write the same email twice. Right.
Okay.
And I think that's your best starting place, because once you get more than one client, you will be asked the same question more than once, right? As soon as you have that second client, they're going to come back to you and say, hey, I just went out to dinner tonight with my wife and she's a co-owner in my LLC. Can we deduct that meal? Right?
Okay.
You're going to answer that same question. If you stay in this field long enough, you're going to answer that same question over and over and over again, right? Is the drive between my house and where I met a client, is that deductible, right? Can I count that as business mileage? Well, it depends. What does it depend on? I don't know. Stop writing emails back to your clients trying to answer that question and make it a blog post. And then every time after that, you get that question, because you will get it a lot of times after that, just send them a link to the blog post. Post it on YouTube. Send them a link to the YouTube video. And you know what they're going to do? They're going to come back and they're going to say, okay, but here's how my situation's different, right? And then you're going to figure out all the differences, right? You're going to figure out what makes it 99 times out of 100 it's not different, but they're going to think that it's different, right? So, but at least you've got that base response. And when you send the response of a blog post, or even better, a YouTube video, it's just going to up your professionalism, regardless of whether that video was professionally edited, or like you said, that blog post was anything more than just posting that video to a blog post. It's going to give you an air of, guess what? You've already thought about this. You've already dealt with it. You've already know how to handle this situation, and clients and prospects are going to love that.
I think about, if you start with the writing, y'all, and you're nervous about video, it's not gonna blow anyone's video pants off. But if you put your blog post on your screen share your blog post, and make your face tiny, that could help those of you who don't want to be all up in people, like if you feel like that the idea of your face being out there terrifying, put the blog post up. You just need a couple of, 2 brand colors, whatever, a bolded title, and then your face down there, tiny as you can make it. Shoot, if you can't even do that, take your face off and just talk through and have that on there. That'll be the first step. And then the next one is put your face small, and then the next one, make it a little bit bigger. But that would be a not terrible look to have for those first videos, y'all. And not everyone is going to love their face on camera, and so figure out ways to hack those obstacles. And ain't nothing wrong with excellent content with just your voice, if that's all that you can do. Okay. Yeah. I want to say my main takeaway, y'all, is what he started with at the very beginning. Marcus Sheridan, they ask, you answer. I feel like everything you've said, Jeremy, has gone back to this: what are people asking you? And you ended with, never write the same email twice. You're only writing emails if people are asking you a question. So I feel like that has been the common thread here. If we start to think about content in that way, what is someone asking you, instead of, I have to come up with people's questions. Anyway, that's my main takeaway. And wow, this was a great session. So tools you've said: Daily Content Machine, Get Review, the Drafts app in Apple products, Anchor FM, Descript, Webflow, ConvertKit. Those are some of the things you've mentioned technically. You've started with just answering questions. I think this has been really, really rich. Thank you. I hope that you have the steam to keep going. I get excited for you whenever I see your tweet of like, next newsletter. And you know what? Thank you for sharing that you only have 260 subscribers to that newsletter, but you can make a very, very good living if you convert the tiniest fraction of that, right? Like that's what, put 5%.
It's 260 more than I would have if I never wrote any of those, right? And you just got to think about it that way. But yeah, every morning at 8 a.m. for about the last 2 months now, and the plan is to keep on going with that until either I can't write them anymore, or they all go away. But even then, I'll probably keep writing them. So
well, and you have to have grace. Like tax season, maybe it's once a week. Maybe there's going to be, like, it doesn't mean that all the other stuff, like, you can ebb and flow. I'm already thinking about, we're going to have a military move in like less than 12 months. And I have to program for that. Like I have to say, if I'm like, I've been trying to do one YouTube tutorial a week, and I've done about 80% for 2022. And I feel like a champ. I mean, I'm like, that is great. And if everyone can do 80% of what their goal was, you're going to crush your competition. Like that's going
Yeah,
to be
just
so
figure
much.
figure out a system that works for you. So,
Yeah.
I have a podcast that I co-host with Chris Hervishon, who's another CPA.
Okay.
We had a guest on. Our most recent episode was an interview with Shannon Weinstein. She's a CPA, and she produces a lot of content, but she has a very different way of going about it. She batches all of her content in, I think, less than an hour a month, right?
Wow.
But she also uses a copywriter, and she uses a couple other contractors that part-time contractors that kind of help her with that. But she's built a system for herself that she feels very comfortable with. And so that's the key is, you have to go through the experimental phase. You have to start producing and figure out what works for you. If an email newsletter doesn't work for you, but video does, great. If you try video and you hate it, then just try the audio and only do the podcast, right?
Mm-hmm.
Just try things, see what works. And once you've started putting it out there, it doesn't matter if your podcast is one episode and you decided this isn't for me and you move on to something else. Don't ever take it back down. Leave it up there. You want to keep it up there, right? But once you figure out what works for you, start building your systems around what actually does work for you, right? And own that system. Don't let anybody else tell you, well, hey, you should be doing it this way or you should be doing it that way. Instead, set up the system that works for you, because if it doesn't work for you, you're going to quit it regardless, right? And I'd rather you be putting out one monthly blog post than never writing a blog post because somebody told you should be doing that weekly instead, right? Do what works for you.
Yep. All right, we're going to wrap up. Y'all, he is J Wells CFO at Twitter. Is that the best place to find you?
That's correct. At JWellsCFO on Twitter. Yep.
At JWellsCFO, and he's active in the bookkeeping side hustle community. Please stay in contact with him, and we thank you so much for your generosity. Again, I'm excited for you to keep going. Maybe we'll do a follow-up. You can tell us anything that's changed a year from now. Who knows? We'll see. But I thank you for your generous time, and we'll sign off for now. And I will see everyone later. I'm signing off.